Good morning, everybody. Afternoon, evening, wherever it may be for you. Today's subject is doors. Wait a minute. Doors? You'll see. So, I like doors. And the reason for that is because it's my sincere belief that behind each and every one of these lies the potential for adventure. And not only that, they also remind me of a very important set of concepts in my line of work: functional, friendly, and fabulous. Also known as the 3 F's. These 3 F's help me prioritize things on any project, regardless of the role I play, whether I'm the project lead, the designer, developer, or QA. Now imagine that if you had opened up the door here, and behind it you saw a brick wall. You wouldn't call that very functional, would you? I mean, what's the point of a door in the first place? It's meant to provide security by providing a barricade that's movable from within the entryway. So we have this door frame here, that's our entryway, and whatever we're trying to get to is on the other side of this brick wall right now. So the very first question you should be asking yourself when you're starting a project is, does this serve the intended purpose? For the intended end user? This is particularly important to keep in mind if you're a project lead and are having conversations with business stakeholders and experienced designers. There's no point in pursuing a project if it doesn't deliver the benefit or benefits it's meant to deliver. Your work should reflect this attitude, and it will help others do their jobs well. Now, if you're a developer or a tester, starting with functional means you should be looking at the API. Ideally, this means using behavior-driven design. Otherwise known as BDD. Just to put it another way, you should be asking yourself, if I send a request to this location with this data, does it return a appropriate response with the information I expect it to deliver? And for a little more real world example, you're on a vacation and you suddenly have the urge to go. So you flag down some person passing by and you're asking them, where's the bathroom? And you do it in Spanish. You would expect someone to understand and tell you where the bathroom is. Only problem, you're in Japan. I don't think there's very many Spanish speakers in Japan, do you? So you're just gonna get this quizzical look on their face and maybe a shrug of the shoulders and get brushed off to the next person. So we're not getting into the how of it. Not yet, anyway. That's for the next step. Nonetheless, using behavior driven design is a good method to ensure your product is in line with that first F, that your product is functional. If you're using BDD correctly, you'll be ensuring that your product behaves as expected, or in other words, you will be saying, given this condition, when I perform this action, then I receive this result in return. So a example of this would be, given that I'm given that I'm a logged in user, when I let's see, when I post a comment on this guy's YouTube channel, then I should see my comment show up below the video. And you may recognize this structure if you're a tester, because it helps you write really good tests. It gives you a expected input, an action, and a expected output. So if you follow this philosophy, you should, by the end of this, have no doubt that you're delivering your promises to the user. There's plenty of examples out there where this was skipped and the team in charge went straight to thinking about how everything should look and feel. And in my experience, not a single one of those projects survived more than a couple months. In one case, the project was so rushed that after 3 days after the final release, the company's email inbox was full with customer complaints. I mean, I'm not kidding you, just absolutely jam-packed. I think the email limit at that time was somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 messages. It was full just like that, and the rest of the emails went undelivered because there's no space for it. Now, once you have ensured that the project is functional, the next thing you should be looking at is making it friendly. So we talked about functional is making sure it does exactly what it's expected to do and nothing more. with friendly, we start taking into consideration how the user might interact with what you're looking at or what you're working on. So I gotta warn you, friendly is not just adding some kind of cute mascot helper like Bonzi Buddy or Clippy. I mean, they may be helpful, but more often than not, the expectations that you build into those don't line up with what the users expect to be receiving help with. That's why you hear all these horror stories about Clippy. Making your project friendly is making sure the user can intuitively work with the product. I mean, you give an iPad to a kid, and you can be pretty sure that they can pick it up and use it without a problem. That's how intuitive some of Apple's designs were. It was so easy to just pick up and start playing with. That's good design right there. Let's take another example. Consider this. Suppose you have a cafe. Just give it some fancy awning here and some windows. And you need a way for people to enter and exit the premise. You could just cut a hole in the wall and call it a day. But that wouldn't be very nice to your customers when it's raining or it's snowing. So what you do instead? You install doors. So to enter the building, they should just pull on the doors and walk inside. Pretty simple, right? There's just a tiny problem there. In order to fit with the cafe's aesthetics, you decided to install these type of handles. You probably know what I'm talking about here. These ginormous, like, plate handles on the doors. Usually, like, glass doors, right? Now, you might be thinking, I'm not so sure about that. I agree. Because the door handles are large plates, most people expect to just push to get the doors open. And if you're supposed to pull on them, one day a customer might just come running in a frenzy for a latte, and they just smash the door into smithereens because they went charging in like a linebacker to push the door open and throw their money at you. What a mess. This whole issue with the doors having different handles than what you would expect for the intended use is a term coined by Don Norman. Some of you may know him already, but he's the author of The Design of Everyday Things. And this concept right here is called Norman doors. Essentially, the interface to something can betray the user's expectations of how it works. This is a classical failure in making something friendly. So, project managers should talk with their experienced designers and come up with wireframes for discussion with the business stakeholders. These same wireframes should be taken to prospective users for testing. You just print them out on a piece of paper and then you tell the users, hey, if you were using this application and you wanted to order a pizza, how would you start going to order that pizza? And just watching how they study your piece of paper or several pieces of paper if you have them, or a clickable prototype. That's another thing. But I usually encourage paper testing just to get it out of the door, get it tested long before there's significant development effort put into it. So study their reactions, see if the doors on the page matches up with the user's expectations. They should be going, oh yeah, I can just go right here to start my order. There you go. Simple. So what you're looking for is the answer to the question, do they understand what they need to do to accomplish their goals? So a truly friendly interface, just like the iPad, should require little to no training for the users. And now keep in mind, I'm talking about the interface here. You will still need to have training for like business rules, that sort of thing. If this, then that, or if the loan is under a certain balance, you're only allowed to do these certain things. Those aren't exactly the part of the interface. You can make them part of the interface. For example, using that last one there, where you're not allowed to do something because certain conditions haven't been met. Well, you can disable the buttons, gray out things, show some kind of error message. That would be perfectly valid things to do in that case. So, one of the things that I encourage as far as the designer and developer interactions is creating a style guide. And the style guide is essentially just a list of guidances from the designer that they will use in the wireframes and mockups before it's delivered to the developers, and the specifications that developers will need to take into account. So, when I talk about a style guide, I'm thinking more like here's the button, here's some text, submit. So, what I would expect to see from a style guide is some rules about when and where to use the buttons. Like, these should be placed at the bottom of the form that is associated with. And then I would expect to see specification, like this distance from here to here, this distance from here to here, here to here. These should be 7 pixel, and these should be a minimum of 15 pixels. And the text is center, and there's a 1 pixel black border, and the minimum width is let's say 176 pixel. Generally speaking, if you have developed your style guide as a UI toolkit, these are just handy references. They're not actually used by the developers. The rules are what is maintained by the developers as they bring the ideas from your wireframe to the actual application. So the style guide is how do I say, it's like the structure that the UI toolkit is built on. So the toolkit has these reusable patterns that can be brought in. You may know them as Angular components or React components, or just regular markup, JavaScript, CSS. So the developers, I would encourage you to work closely with your designers to make sure that the designs are feasible. So work together, guys. It's important because I have played both roles as a designer and developer. And in my life as a developer, it has been a nightmare when having to deal with what I refer to as designer astronauts. They're shooting for the moon with all of their designs, and then that design gets brought in front of a business stakeholders. They fall in love with the idea, and then they bring it over to you, the developers, without having talked to you at all beforehand about, is this feasible? Is it reasonable? Can we do this in the time that we're given? And then you just end up with the absolute mess from a project standpoint. You have to tell your poor project lead to go back to the business stakeholders and tell them the developer said, no, we can't do this, and you betrayed their expectations. So let's avoid all of that and work together before you start talking to the business stakeholders about the design and the implementation. And trust me, you get all of that worked out ahead of time. Get all those bugs kinked, get all of those bugs ironed out, iron out those kinks. The users will appreciate it. Now, most people are actually surprised when I tell them that color and typography are actually the last things that I even think about in a project. I know it's kind of blasphemy for a designer, but there's a good reason for that, and that is the final F. Once you've made your application functional and you made it friendly, and when I talk about friendly, I also include things like accessibility concerns, like screen readers, limited motion, temporary or permanent disabilities. You gotta have those things into account before you can even think about making it pretty. Because in one way, it helps prevent everybody that's involved with the project from getting all wrapped up in the little details. They should focus on what needs to be done, how it should be done, and then you can make it look good. And this is the concept behind MVPs, minimum viable products. You focus on the first two F's, functional and friendly. You get a pretty good MVP to start out with, and you can build on top of that for later projects or later revisions and efforts. And so, if you have a project that's functional friendly, you're more than halfway through, and making it fabulous is just icing on the cake. Because once you have that style guide and the UI toolkit applied, well, you really don't need to do anything else. It's just throw the markup on the site, clear your caches if you need to, and it's all done for you. So I put that last out for fabulous because in the process of making the project friendly, the markup is usually going to be established at that point, and the overall layout direction is determined. And So you have that established, and with good markup and good layout direction, it makes styling way easier. I mean, you look at some of the CSS jokes that are out there. One of the most common is describing CSS as those Venetian blinds, and you're just constantly fiddling trying to get the thing up. It's a mess. But with good markup and good layout direction, it's easy. It's like power windows, even. Just shoop and shoop. No more fiddling. I also do produce wireframes in my deliverables with the intention of generating conversations about what the user needs to see on the page and how they would complete their task. So, spending too much time on that visual appearance cuts down the amount of time that you may very well need to turn the project in a different direction if the stakeholders throw a wrench in your plans. Only when you get to the mock-up stage should you worry about putting the finishing touches on the screen and provide those UI design specifications to the developers. Now that I say this, there are times when you may want to provide those UI specifications, but it should be a trimmed down version. Specifically, I'm saying early UI specs would be things like spacing. Spacing is a big one, and layout. Center. Centering for like text and components, and then the later. The later UI specs can be like color, type, little fiddly bits of the overall design, but the early specs can be given to the developers early so they can start getting some of that work out of the way if they don't already have a UI toolkit to reference. And that'll make it easier when we do need working prototypes to show to the business stakeholders. And given the incomplete nature, it should be easy to convey to the business stakeholders, okay, hold up, it's not done yet. Don't think it's a shippable product right away, but we want to be able to have a conversation, get those ideas rolling, get any issues or concerns out of the way before we get too far down the line with it. So, all in all, I would hope that all of you keep this very important phrase in mind because I use it all the time and it's saved my butt many times over. So take it into account. And that is all the material I have today. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.